are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to the GBSN webinar, Tips and Traps of Using Student Teams. Before we officially get started, let me go ahead and review a few housekeeping items with you on how you can participate in today's webinar event. What you see in front of you is the GoToWebinar attendee interface. The viewer window is on the left, that's where you'll be watching the presentation. And the control panel is on the right. The control panel is how you will participate in today's event, so let's go ahead and look at that a little bit more closely. All the lines will be muted throughout the hour-long event, but if you have questions or would like to respond to a question, you do that through the chat feature. So you can go ahead and respond to questions right here on the control panel. And go ahead, we expect a number of questions to come out. We have a number of individuals joining us, so you can send your questions throughout. I wouldn't wait till the end, as we might not have a chance to get to all of them. The presentation will be shared. I apologize for that typo. We will be sharing it at the end, along with a number of handouts and materials that you can go ahead and use. There will also be a survey at the end of the webinar. And we do ask to answer just a few short questions. Your feedback really do provide us information on how we plan to schedule our webinars in the future. So go ahead and take a few minutes to do that as well. Let's go ahead and do a practice in the chat feature. Go ahead, send me in the questions box where you're calling from or logging in from today, what country. So go ahead and click in the questions and hit submit or send. And let's just see where a few people are from today. Okay, we have someone from Bowie, Maryland. All right, we have several from the U.S. We have Ireland, we have Japan, New York City, Washington, D.C., as well as Chicago. Fantastic. So for those of you who don't know us, the Global Business School Network is a nonprofit based in Washington, D.C. We have a network of over 70 business schools working to improve business and management education for the developing world. And we're based here and calling in from Washington, D.C. And our member schools, if you're interested in membership, please do go ahead and send me an email to learn more. Our activities are comprised of 3 different areas. Includes networking events, international development programs, as well as areas in thought leadership, such as developing of cases, research, and surveys. A couple of networking events that I want to highlight is our upcoming conference in Accra, Ghana. That will be November 2nd through 4th, with the theme Markets Shaping Management Education. Another event that I'd like to highlight is our Learning by Doing. This is our Experiential Learning Summit. It will be a full-day workshop focused on building experiential learning opportunities. And that will be August 1st in Cambodia. So, without further ado, very pleased to introduce Margaret Andrews from the Managing Mind and Hand Associates, a boutique consulting firm that supports higher education. She's also a lecturer for Harvard University and has a long list of prestigious schools behind her, such as Holt International Business School, Harvard University's Division of Continuing Education, as well as formerly of MIT Sloan School of Business, a member school. So hello, Margaret. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, everybody. This is Margaret here. Very glad that you've all joined us today, and I've been looking forward to this. So I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, and then I'm going to dive right into the slides and leave a lot of room at the end for discussion because I think there's a lot of best practices out there, and I'd love to get them out. So one of the things I'll say is that I have a foot in both the business world as well as higher education, and in particular mostly in management education. And so my higher ed roots are both broad and deep. I started off as before I was in higher education, as I say, a recovering CPA, and I've been a strategy consultant and a marketer in financial services. So then when I moved into higher education, I was the executive director of the MBA program at the MIT Sloan School of Management. I later on went to become the Associate Dean at Harvard's Division of Continuing Education, where I ran the management program and started up a series of professional development programs. And then I became the Vice Provost at Hult International Business School, where I managed all of the graduate programs on 5 campuses in 4 different countries. So I'm really dedicated to higher education and to management education. And so I've also been teaching for a long time, and I've taught in a variety of formats, including on-campus accelerated, online, through web conference, and also doing hybrid, so part online, part on campus, and also executive ed type teaching. So I've taught in a lot of different ways, and actually I've used Teams in all of these settings. So I'm very much looking forward to working with you. So anyway, here I'm going to start my slides now so that you can see them, and I will turn off my camera as well. So here is what we're going to talk about today. So the tips and traps, and here's the agenda that we'll go through. So one is we're going to start with some questions to talk about who's here and what people are currently doing. Then I'll go through some pros and cons of using student teams that I've found both through research and experience. Then give you sort of what I call the student team roadmap and some driving instructions both for ourselves as well as for students. Lessons learned along the way, and then we'll leave a lot of time at the end for best practices, sharing, discussion. I'll also share some resources that, that I found very helpful, and I hope that you'll do the same. So with that, I am going to turn off my slides, and then Lisa is going to do a couple of the polls. So for example, the first question is, who is in this webinar? What is your role? And please pick any of the ones that apply.
Go ahead, you can click as many as you need. You can click more than one and then go ahead and hit submit. We have about 67, 72%, have a few more stragglers waiting to respond. We have a few more polls after this, so it looks like 100%. Let's go ahead and see the results.
Great. All right, so a lot of people that teach instructional designer. Great. A nice mix. Wonderful, thank you. And then the next poll is, what's your experience in using student teams?
This one you can only select one and then go ahead and submit. Give everyone a few more minutes. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll.
Great. That's some excellent experience. So, but also some people that are not using student teams in their courses as of yet, but some great experience. Excellent. Thank you. Next is, what's the typical team size you use for team projects or papers in your course? It may vary, but what's sort of a typical one that you use for a number of people on a team?
Okay, let's go ahead. We'll close the poll.
All right, so 5 to 6 looks like it's the winner there, and 3 to 4 second. Excellent. Good. Thank you very much. And another one, for those of you that use Teams, do you incorporate team feedback into each student's grade? So do you, it presumes that you do performance evaluations of some type. Do you use that as part of the grade?
Okay, going to go ahead and close the poll.
Great. All right. So very high percentage do. Good. I should say I do as well. Um, and last question is, and this is going to be a chat poll, and we will not show the results yet. We'll show them later, but just want to get your thoughts on this. And I know some of you may be typing for a while, so what I'll do is I'll give you a little bit of time to start typing in your answer, then we'll move on. And I also encourage people to continue sending in some best practices throughout the session, and we'll talk about them at the end. So next poll, being a chat poll, what are some of your best practices in using student teams? What have you learned over your experience that has been helpful to you in using student teams?
So go ahead in the chat feature like you did with your country. And again, you're going to have some time. You're going to have the hour-long event to answer this question. But as you think, we'll be sharing these at the end. What are some of the best practices for using student teams? So Margaret, if you'd like to go ahead and continue.
Great, thank you. And so Lisa, are you going to share my screen? Okay, you can see it. Okay, excellent. Okay, so how it all started for me in terms of using student teams. So, you know, I did my undergraduate at Berkeley and my graduate at MIT Sloan, and in lots of classes I was in student teams. And throughout that time I never got any instruction about how to be good on a team and things like that. And so when I first started using teams many years ago, it was for a class that I created called Managing Yourself and Others. I think I've been teaching this course for, I think, about 9 years. And I started off, you know, using teams, and over time I realized that a lot of teams were not doing that well, or they were really struggling. And so I started teaching people how to work in teams. I started doing performance evaluations and things like that. So a lot of what I've learned about using teams came very much firsthand. And I also did, you know, of course, a lot of research on, you know, some best practices and things like that. And I'll share with you what some of the things that have worked for me. You know, so after this started off as a traditional class taught in person and on campus over a 15-week semester, so a very, very traditional class. And after that, I taught the class in a variety of formats and lengths, including a more accelerated 7-week on-campus course, then an online web conference course, then as a hybrid course it had an intensive on-campus weekend, and the rest taught through a web conference. And the course was very popular, and so I have also recreated it as a 2-day executive education program, as well as a few offshoot 1-day executive education programs that, you know, pick on a certain topic within it. And in each of these iterations, I've had to change part of the program or the course and the way I did things, because when you chunk it out a little bit differently, it changes everything to a certain extent. But I've always kept some component of teams. So for the executive education programs, it's a team that does an exercise or two together and some buzz groups of 2 to 4 people talking about various topics. But in the longer course, I continue to do a team project and or a paper. So I've learned a lot about using teams over the years just from this class alone, but I've also, you know, I've created and taught several different courses, which you can see down there below, and I use teams in all of them. And interestingly, there was such a demand for more information on teams that I actually created one that I launched last year or last fall called Making Teams Work, and I'm doing an executive program and advanced team skills workshops. So there's a lot of demand for this in terms of people are realizing, not just in the academic realm, but certainly in the world of work, that everybody needs to have a little bit better team skills. So, you know, why use student teams at all? There's lots of different pros and cons, but, you know, there is research that the learning is better if indeed the class is set up well and the project is set up well, that students working in small teams do learn more. And interestingly, those that work in these collaborative groups also appear more satisfied with their classes. And I will say that I think that tends to be true, and I do a mid-course evaluation in every class that I teach pretty much. And that's a mid-course evaluation for me, and I ask them essentially the same questions midway through the course that they get at the end of the course for the official course evaluation. And I've noticed that one question I ask is, how is your team going? And those that are having a good team experience generally are enjoying the course, they're getting more out of it, they're generally more satisfied. And those that are having difficulties with their teams rate it much lower. So, but there's a graphic here I'll share with you, that sort of the team perspective, the student perspective of, what group projects are supposed to teach you, communication, responsibility, collaboration, and lots about teamwork. But then there's also the other side that students will say is, it teaches you a little bit of those things and a lot of trust no one. So a lot of, as I'm sure you know, there are definitely some teams that struggle. And so because of that, I've started teaching students more about teams and teamwork, what to expect, etc. So in terms of the pros and the cons, the pros, really that if you do this well, students really do learn from each other. They teach each other everything from the content to different ways of researching to how to interview people. So there's a lot of student learning that I think comes from the team, doing teams, whether, as I say, it's small little buzz groups or teams that work on a problem during one course session, or a team that does a much bigger project. They learn a lot more than the course subject material. They can tackle bigger and harder assignments, and I've found too that the higher quality work is submitted with teams in general. Of course, there's always one exception to that rule in almost every class, but in general, I found that the work that's submitted is of much higher quality, and I'm sure this is not lost on anybody who's done a lot of teaching and grading, is that you have fewer but higher quality submissions to grade, and so that, especially when it's a final project, and particularly at the end of the semester, that can be very helpful. So in terms of what are the cons, is that the instructor, to make this work, I've found that students need to know more about team skills. So you do need to spend some time on this. Now, I've also worked and taught in places that do a lot, particularly with either undergraduates or with MBAs and graduate students that do a lot of work with teams, and so they teach them a lot of these skills up front. And so, but what I found is that it always bears repeating. To a certain extent, it's, remember, you've talked about this already, you'll see this again. So I find even if they have a course or they do a lot of work up front during orientation or something like that, that it always bears repeating. I think the con is that you really do need to think through what makes a good team versus an individual project. We'll talk about what makes a good team assignment in just a moment, but you really need to think through some of the parameters of it. There's, from the student side, there's also process and coordination time for them, and the bigger the team, the more difficult and time-consuming it is. As you know, if you're trying to set up a meeting with just one other person, it's a lot faster than trying to set up a meeting with 5 or 6 people, and they have that as well. One thing I've found is also that, and I've had this situation happen before a couple of different times, where it's hard to know which students did what work. So the first one was with around free riders, or some of the students that don't do the work but are hanging on to get the grade because they know that there's people on the team that really care about the grade and they'll do the work. So with that, that was actually when I started doing team performance evaluations, because what I found was early on, before I did team performance evaluations, that there were more problems with free riders and people were much more unhappy on their teams, and there was a lot more student stress because of that. But the other thing that I found as well is that I've had papers that were submitted where there was a decent amount of plagiarism, and I was actually in a situation where the team knows who did what part of the paper, and the person who actually committed the plagiarism did come forward, but that's something I always keep in mind too. So I do now tell students that they need, they are responsible for the joint product, and so they do need to make sure that they all have the same standards and understanding what plagiarism is. And we also talk about that as well. And lastly, there are team conflicts, and sometimes they'll ask you to help to facilitate and things like that. So it's a learning for them. It's oftentimes an unpleasant learning for them, and sometimes it can be very difficult for the instructor as well. So some of the elements of a good team assignment or project is, the first one is around interdependence, that if the students can do it by themselves, there's no reason to have it as a team. And so, thinking about the different components of it, is it something that one person could do if they had a certain amount of time, or is it something where there is a lot of interdependence with skills, with timing, with access, with all of those kinds of things. Second is around accountability of students to the team as well as the class or the instructor, that they are accountable for the results, and that goes along with the interdependence. A third one is around the interaction, particularly face-to-face, and this really is a big thing, and I talk a lot about it to students up front, about how important face-to-face interaction is. Second is, through Skype, which is semi-face-to-face. Third is voice-to-voice, and then is email and other forms of communication. Now, this gets a lot more difficult when you're dealing with virtual teams, which in a very high percentage of the courses that I teach, students are in not only different time zones, but in different countries and very, very far apart. And so I talk to them a lot about how social time becomes even more important when you can't see people and you can't, go to the coffee shop together. The fourth is that, helping them to develop social skills that are needed for collaboration. And part of what I do, and I'll talk about this, is that I talk a lot about team skills and about conflict and conflict resolution or conflict management throughout the course, and I give them opportunities to address these things both up front and midway through and at the end, so that they're learning those things as they need them, I'll say. And lastly is that they need to look at their own process and their own skills, and so I've incorporated that as well into what I do when I use student teams in teaching. So a few things that I've learned along the way is that if teams are set up well, they can produce tremendous learning and lasting friendships. And the reverse is also true. I've seen teams where they worked very well together and they went off and started a business through people that started off as friends and ended up not as friends. So, I do also mention that to students as well, so that they keep that in mind as they go through. Another is that, setting and managing student expectations for what to expect throughout their team experience has really been key. Really the first time I taught some of this and used student teams, I didn't really do any of that. I think I thought back then that, oh my gosh, we all work in teams. We've all been doing student teams since we were in grade school, and that's especially true of people coming into undergraduate programs as well as graduate programs now. I know my own kids have been doing teamwork in their K through 12 for many, many years, and so I thought, well, they've probably seen all this stuff, they know how to work in teams, and that assumption was actually not true. So, in fact, many times what they had learned were some bad habits. So one thing I've learned, and this can change for certain types of projects, but in general, I don't allow students to pick their own teams. In general, I found that random is good. I go through alphabetically and assign them to team 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And in general, I found that that's as effective as trying to set teams in another way. The only time that I don't do that is when it's an assignment where I realize I need somebody that knows marketing, I need somebody that knows finance, I need somebody that knows accounting, etc. And then what I'll do is I'll have a survey where I'll ask people, what either courses they've taken or what background they have, so that I can I can set up those teams appropriately. Diversity is good. You know, I try to mix up teams as much as possible, and I find that doing it randomly works just as well as any other thing. And it's interesting because when I was at MIT and we would, you know, set up teams from the very beginning during orientation, and you would see some teams really struggle in the beginning, and then they would figure it out and excuse me, get moving, and they were very effective teams. And you would ask them at the end, you know, what made you so successful? And they'd say, we were really diverse, and that really helped. You would also see teams that would sometimes struggle in the beginning, but would actually sometimes would be very, what do I want to say, easygoing, friendly, etc., without any bumps, and then they would really not do well later in the semester. And when you ask them at the end what was hindering your team from doing well, a lot of times those teams would say we were too diverse. So you would oftentimes hear both diversity helped them and diversity didn't help them, actually made their team struggle a bit. And so I do talk to them about how to think about that sometimes. The other thing I found is that in classes that I've taught, particularly the hybrid and web conference courses that I teach through Harvard, that I have people from literally almost every time zone. And so one of the things that I tell people is in setting up the teams is that I disadvantage each team equally. Because I feel that, you know, a lot of times people say, well, why don't you put all the Europeans together, and why don't you put all the people from Asian time zones together? And I said, well, that would actually, it might mean that you have a team that's made up, you know, of people from one or two different countries. And, you know, so we're going to get their perspective. It's actually better to mix it up a lot more. So sometimes a team will come to me and say, oh my gosh, we're managing all these different time zones. And I says, yes, you and everybody else. So that is actually the way I've done it. And I'd be very curious to hear later if other people do it differently and what they found with that. So another thing is that I now force students to do things that they tell me are silly or not needed because we're all adults. And those things are spending time getting to know each other. I give them, particularly on the hybrid courses where I have them over the weekend, I have them spend time getting to know each other, going out to lunch together, you know, having a coffee break together, etc. Doing a team charter, I now actually require that in most of my classes, and discussing their own team process, and I do give them time for that as well. I found that when team charters, which we'll talk about in a minute, there's a lot of differing opinions on what people think teamwork is all about. Another is that I had learned that I had to help people learn to give feedback. I really didn't think this was necessary, particularly with grad students. And so the first time I did team performance evaluations, I told people that, you know how to do this. You're all working adults and managing people. And in the first team performance evaluation that I did, somebody wrote, so-and-so is a jerk. And I thought, oh, I guess I really did need to teach them how to give feedback that's constructive and illustrative and things like that. So I've learned that over the years. I have to do that as well. Another is that, you know, conflict is often good, depending on what type it is, and I'll talk about that in a moment. I try to coach them to solve their own problems on the team as opposed to having me intervene. I have had to intervene a couple of different times, but I try very hard to facilitate as opposed to solving the problem for them. I will say beware of taking sides, particularly it's oftentimes the person that comes to you with the problem that you're hearing their perspective, and there's oftentimes one or more other perspectives, and I've oftentimes learned that the hard way. And I would say check-ins help. I do set up a time to check in with different teams, and I can, even when it's a virtual team, I can tell by voices how things are going, and I ask questions to try to elicit some of the conflict that's happening. And I would also say evaluations are key. I definitely found that the number of team problems went way down when I started doing team evaluations, because it really, I don't want to say it eliminated the free rider problem, but it significantly improved it. So let me show you what I talk to them about, and this is my way of managing student expectations. And this is, I talk about the journey and how there's going to be ups and downs and beautiful times and ugly times and sharp turns and those kinds of things. And that's all to be expected. Many of you know about all of the stages of team development, you know, the forming and the storming and norming and performing, etc. And I go over this with them, even though they will most of the time say, yeah, I know this. And I say, but this is, you really need to think about this. And remember that some of the emotional highs and lows are a normal part of group development. So is the ebb and flow of task performance, as the team learns to resolve its conflicts and relationships and things like that. And I also remind them that early process conflict can actually help them. That, you know, some teams have told me, oh, we're such a great team, we all get along, there's no conflict at all. And I tell them that sometimes, depending on the project that you're working on, that's not always good. You know, does that mean that you're really not addressing some of it? So what I do is, in terms of showing them the stages of team development, I talk a little bit to them about, okay, so here's the road ahead. So in the beginning of the trip, I talk a lot about forming. And so some of the things that I've done are, I do a lot with introductions. I have people introduce themselves in many different ways. So, you know, I have them, you know, the usual name, rank, and serial number, sharing their favorite food, what one food would you take to a desert island, what course have they taken that changed their life, what song describes their life or their feelings, or they feel it was written just for them. I use an exercise called the 6-word memoir. So lots of different ways that I get people to try to get to know each other on a personal basis. I also, I do this whether it's a virtual, or we're doing this virtually, but it's even better, of course, when they're on campus, do some exercises to get to know each other, be it solving a problem together, debriefing a case, you know. And one of the things that I found very effective, and I do this particularly with virtual teams, is I have them talk about, you know, the good, the bad, and the ugly of their past experiences with teams, because it's something that actually everybody likes to talk about, and everyone has a horror story. Also, a lot of people do have good stories. So I ask them to think about the good and the bad experience they've had working in teams, and then as a group to create a list of the good and bad aspects of working in teams, to classify these as team task or social aspects of teamwork, and what could be done to make teams more effective and more enjoyable. So this actually helps when I have them move into the doing a team charter. Another that I do is I try to, and this obviously, you know, is much easier to do when you have them on campus, but I try to have them do some sort of a physical exercise. And what you see there is a setup for one of my favorite ones, which is called the Marshmallow Challenge. If you're interested in finding out more about that, you can go to marshmallowchallenge.com. But I found this is a great exercise, and people really like it. So the long and short of it is that teams have to build the tallest structure they can with some spaghetti, tape, string, and a marshmallow that goes on top, and they have 18 minutes to do it. And students really like it, and the energy level is very high throughout it and afterwards. But what I really like about the exercise is it allows for a really good debrief, because some teams, and every single time I've done this, some teams either are disqualified because their structure is leaning and they can't take their hands off it, or the structure falls. So definitely some teams fail. But the behaviors I've seen in running this exercise over the year are many. I've even seen teammates getting into arguments. I've seen one team that was hitting each other on the hand, you know, to stop them from doing something with the structure. I've seen another team that tried to sabotage their own structure to get back at a bullying or self-appointed team leader. And so those are very interesting debriefs, as you might imagine. But the team debrief actually showed me something that I noticed over the years, and that is that teams that take the debrief seriously and have a very frank discussion about what happened, what didn't happen, and the behaviors that were exhibited and how people reacted to those are the teams that do the best on the team assignment as well. I've seen teams where they had a difficult process during that marshmallow challenge, and if they avoid talking about it, those teams have a real problem. So I've also told students what I've learned over the years by watching this, and I've seen teams during a debrief actually go back and talk more after they heard that. So I do share that with them, and sometimes it gives somebody on the team a good excuse to bring up what really had been bothering them before. So, a few things that I share with people are, tips and traps on communication. As I say, like with email, if you're not sure the tone is right, it probably isn't. Don't send an email when you're mad. When in doubt, don't hit send. Remember that emails live forever and can take on a life of their own, and never assume it's private. So, some things that we all know, but a lot of times they and we sometimes forget. Also in meetings, whether they're in person or virtual, I really stress to them having an agenda with times so that everybody knows ahead of time what to really be prepared for. I talk about the skills of asking questions and active listening, the whole idea, seeking to understand as opposed to pushing your own point. Giving constructive feedback on ideas, and managing feelings so that you're not really upsetting other people on the team. And I also talk to them about two other things that I think are really important. One is that they should spend the majority of their time when they're talking about the unique knowledge or perspective of the different members, because most teams actually spend most of their time talking about common information or what everybody already knows or agrees upon, as opposed to what could be a unique perspective. So I mention that to them, and I also remind them of that. And the other is that make sure that everyone is involved in the discussion and make sure that no one is dominating. And this is also where I have them meet in the middle of the semester to also talk more about that. And lastly, I ask them to consider the culture of the receiver. I tell them, hey, it's always nice to be nice, and when in doubt, give somebody the benefit of the doubt. So just some general things. Then I do have them do a team contract or a team charter. I found this to be very effective. And what I do, though, is that when I first started doing this, I just kind of gave them some very loose guidelines. And now I give them a lot more things to consider. Everything from goals, how they're going to communicate, meeting times, promptness, who's going to do the agenda, what are legitimate reasons for missing meetings, courtesies, participation, what are your rules for that? What roles will people play? I want to mention that on the right-hand side under roles, one of the things that I found that has been very effective in working with teams is, if any of you are familiar with De Bono, who does a lot of work with creativity, he has what he calls the 6 thinking hats, things like process or potential and things like that. But there's one hat, he calls it the black hat, and that is the hat that is to look for problems or danger or things that can go wrong. And I've told a lot of teams that it's actually really helpful to have somebody assigned the role of the black hat thinker in the room at every one of their meetings, so that you avoid conditions of groupthink, and you are really beating up on the idea as opposed to beating up on each other. And teams that have adopted that have told me that it was very, very effective. And because when it was somebody's role to do that, it made it safe. So I pass that on as something I've learned. With virtual teams, which more and more of them are in higher education as well as at work, I do try to tell them spend as much time together as possible, and that really getting to know each other is very helpful. Social time is not wasted time, and that if they spend even, the first 5 to 10 minutes of every meeting, talking about what's going on in their life or things like that, it actually helps, particularly when they do run into some inevitable problems later on. I do talk to teams about cultural differences and behavioral norms and things like that, and ask them to be sensitive to local cultures and to each other in terms of, where's family time, religious holidays, customs, work hours, and of course sleep. And to be aware of their own communication practices in terms of jargon and metaphor, particularly when you're working with people from with a different language. So kind of the middle is where we oftentimes see a lot of the conflict come out. Sometimes it comes out very early, but sometimes it's middle to late. And oftentimes you'll see it expressed very much so, and sometimes it's not expressed. So it's a little passive aggressive and people are not wanting to deal with problems. But then those are the teams that really struggle at the end because the conflict inevitably comes out and they really don't know how to deal with it. A lot of times it's really, and we talk about this a lot, it's about differences in perspective. You see it one way, I see it another way. And so that's where advocacy and inquiry comes in to try to figure out why we're seeing things differently and how we might reconcile those. I do talk to them also about the different types of conflict, whether it's healthy or unhealthy. Healthy is focused on the task or process. It's usually about legitimate differences of opinion about the task, and different expectations about the impact on decisions. Whereas unhealthy conflict is usually over power, rewards, resources, recognition, things like that. It's usually between or oftentimes the individuals and the group goals differ. And a few things that can contribute to this are poorly run meetings, which is why I talk to them about agendas and things like that. Personal grudges from the past, if they've worked with somebody in the past and it hasn't gone well. And also faulty communication, which email is oftentimes the culprit there, as we all know. And on that, I give them a little bit more information around, the difference between sort of cognitive conflict and otherwise. So, cognitive is the healthy, task or process oriented. But there's some good parts to this, and that when you have this, and you manage it well, it tends to lead to a larger number of alternatives and perspectives, identification and recognition of a larger number of critical assumptions. There's always a lot of assumptions there, and how we evaluate these and understanding the group decisions in more depth. So this is the good kind of conflict to have. On the other hand, the effective conflict is more emotional, and it's focused on personal incompatibilities or disputes. So I'm right, you're wrong, I win, you lose type of thing. And so this leads to lower levels of individual commitment. Also, people are less committed to group decisions and oftentimes will unwind them later on or keep bringing it up. Less desire to work as a group, and lower levels of satisfaction. So, I talk to them about, task conflict being good, emotional conflict not being as good, and when cognitive conflict verges on the edge of becoming emotional, is a good time to take a break, inject some humor, and to call it, to say, this feels like it's getting personal. Let's try to bring it back to task and talk about performance. So in terms of managing conflict, I talk to them about focusing on factual information. If it's between looking at two perspectives, seek a third or a fourth. There may be different ways of bridging these, or a different perspective that no one's considering. To focus on the common group goals. Humor can oftentimes be very helpful in this situation. So if there's a student who has a good sense of humor, they are very valuable on a team. And utilize mechanisms for calling the question and making a choice. So, and I talk about this, as I say, I bring it up front early in the semester or in the course, and we hit it again midway through. I also give them a lot of team time, and I will oftentimes, doing cases and things like that, I will have them, meet together. I can do breakout rooms in these web conference courses, but lots of different ways where I have them spend some time together. But I also, midway through, I have them do an evaluation of each other. It's not written or anything like that, but I ask them to consider, to what extent are you really a full participant in the team? How well is the group working on its task? To what extent are minority or conflicting views listened to with respect? What extent they have had thoughts or unexpressed feelings or opinions that they haven't felt comfortable with. So to kind of think about it on their own and then share it as a group. So I usually leave some time, I would say, a quarter of the class or something like that, to allow them to do that midway through the course. And it has been very, very helpful because teams can then address some of the issues that they're having. And then lastly, on the end, in wrapping up with student teams, I do an evaluation. And we've got a handout that shows the one that I use. It's morphed over the years. In fact, it seems to morph almost every time I use it. I've gotten it down to essentially 4 questions right now, or 4, one of them being a multi-part question. But it really, and I teach them how to give feedback, and I ask them to, be constructive and illustrative and these types of things. I also ask them to debrief their process at in the last session of the class, where they'll go into a breakout room and do that. But I also, and for one of the classes that I teach, called Making Teams Work, I actually have them do a team process report at the end, where they all collectively talk about the process, and then each person writes something about how it impacted them or what they would do differently, etc. And that has turned out to be very effective. So, short list of things that I've learned along the way is spending time going over teamwork basics is really important. Even if they know it, it's really helpful for them to be reminded of it. Share with them your own observations about what makes teams successful and not successful in your class or on this type of project, because they may not have thought about that, and this may be a similar or different type of project than they've done in the past. Have them do a team charter no matter how much they roll their eyes, because one of the things that I've found is when teams hit difficulties, the team charter is actually their way of going back and saying, here's what we agreed to. And I tell them, you can amend the team charter if you want, but that's what you agreed to up front, so go back and talk about it through that lens. Hold them to the team charter when they run into issues. As much as possible, have them solve their own problems. Be a really good listener and a coach, but intervene only in rare situations. I have intervened very rarely, and one time I was about ready to let one team member off the team because the team was in such conflict. I didn't know how they could get past it. And while I was thinking about it, they solved the problem. So I didn't actually have to do that. Another is to give them time during class to do a midway team check-in session and surface any problems. This has been super helpful. And that is the end of my portion of it. I have 2 email addresses here, and I would love to hear what you do that works.
Great. Thanks so much, Margaret. We have a lot of questions come in. I know we only have about 12 minutes. We also had a number of best practices come in. If I don't get to all of them, we will be sending out a follow-up email as well. That follow-up email will include a PDF of this PowerPoint presentation, and I really like that team charter examples as too, so that will be a part of it because a number of things have come up from the audience on team charters. Margaret, you will also be including 2 other handouts in that email, a sample team evaluation, as well as a number of links for best practices in general. So we will be sharing that in the email. So that being said, starting with our first question, this comes from Pratiti from the University of Maryland. Hopefully I said that right. Some students naturally dominate. They may not consciously ask everyone to participate, and the quiet ones are happy to let it happen. as the instructor, I'm not always seeing those regular team interactions. How do you even out the discussion if you are not around? And then because we have another, a couple of other questions to add to that, sort of on the feedback side, how do you sort of stop the group think, as in one student giving another student, both of them giving each other good praise, sort of with the agreement that, you know, they both want good responses, they both want to receive that. So two questions for you. Sort of dominating quiet as well as group thinking on evaluations.
So I'm actually gonna treat that as three questions. One is just around groupthink, but in general, the black hat role is huge. I'm a huge believer in it, and in fact, in a lot of teams that I work on, I've brought that in myself, so that when we're evaluating any idea or concept or something like that, that somebody is assigned to pick holes in it, and it's nothing personal. You're beating up on the idea, not on each other. So I think that's one way in groupthink in general. With the evaluations, it does happen. So one of the things that I've found is that in the evaluation that I use now, one question is, you know, to have them say one thing that this person did very well on the team or was very helpful, you know, a kind of a positive feedback element. And then I also have them give a negative one. And I tell them that this person, there's nothing they can do to improve is not a good answer. So that, and I also, when I do the team evaluation, half of the evaluation's grade is on the feedback that they receive from their team, and half of it is on the feedback that they give to their team. So the quality of that and how helpful and how well done that is. That said, I find that teams that are really struggling, that you know it. Even if they agree, they're going to give each other excellence across the board. If a team is really struggling, they won't hold to it, or at least that's been my experience. I have definitely had teams that gave each other all excellence, and I think the team probably did okay. I'm not sure that there's, you know, I have not done forced rankings. I know that some people do, where they'll say, you know, out of your, you know, 3, 4, 5 other team members, rank order how, you know, valuable they were on a team. I'm not really in favor of that. I think I just am not in favor of that, and I'm sure some people do that, but it's not my style. So I think. In general, if there is a free rider on the team, it will almost always come up in the evaluations, or at least that's been my experience with it. And the other question around, you know, making sure that everybody's voice is heard. That's a tough one in the sense for a couple of reasons. One is that, and I've definitely seen this, where there's a very dominant person and other people feel bullied by it. That's easier to deal with because you can help the team have that discussion. If there's somebody who's sort of dominant and everybody is just as happy to let them dominate, maybe the team is okay with that, and you know, maybe there's not a lot that you can do. But I do have them do this mid-course check-in with themselves, and I ask people, as I say, to write down their responses to it individually before they talk about it, because what I found is that, and again, I learned this by doing it, is that sometimes I would do something where I would say, okay, here's the questions, go talk about them. And then later on, I would talk to one of the team members, and they would say, you know, I didn't think of it at the time, but I wish I had thought about and said X. So I realized that having them write it down and think about it first before discussing it was actually really, really helpful. So the more you can get them talking about their own process, I think the better it can be.
Okay, so I have a number of questions on team charters. Going to try and summarize them. This comes from both University of Maryland as well as University of Limerick in Ireland. One saying, I've done team charters with mixed results. Sometimes the results are better when the teams take it seriously. Other times they spend lots of time on the charter and then promptly forget it afterwards. How do you deal with keeping them on track with following their own team rules?
Yeah, so I use an example which happened all the time. And so that was when I remember when I was at MIT, and we had lots of different teams, and we would talk to them about their charters and things like that. And on many, many, many charters, one of the group norms said, we will not swear, right? And so and what would happen very often is within 20 minutes somebody would drop an F-bomb. And if you happen to hear it or see it or something like that, you could say something. Should that be part of your charter? Was anybody here really upset by that? Or should it go off the charter? But another one, and that's a really common one, is people that are late. So if they have a team meeting set up for 10 a.m. on Tuesday, to the next week say, you could even do a show of hands, how many people had that on their charter, how many people have violated one or more norm by this point. You get some hands up and you get a lot of laughter. And then that's when you can say, okay, go back to your charter and talk about it and what should be different. A lot of times we say things that we think should be on there, but it's really not us. Your one team's charter should not really look like another team's charter because you're going to have different norms, you come from different cultures, you work differently. So I also show them a couple of examples of team charters that I've seen in the past. And there's one that I use that I can't remember all of it, but one of them said no BCCing. And that's an eye-opener for a lot of people because they think, oh, I would have never thought to put that, but yeah, it really annoys me when people do that. Another one that is on that charter that I often show them says, and this is the one where everyone kind of gasps and says, wow, that's really, a tough rule. They said, if any person comes to the meeting unprepared, the meeting will be canceled. And so, but the team that did that was very strict on that rule, and they said that, one time somebody did come unprepared and they canceled, and everybody was furious at that team member, and that team member never did it again, nor did anybody else. So if you have charters or pieces of charters that you've seen in the past, sometimes you can show them that and get them to really think about it. Because the more time they wrestle with really what should be on there for them, as opposed to what sounds expedient or nice, that I think that can be very helpful.
Great. Thanks so much, Margaret. Another question is, can you give us, and then I'll close in our last few minutes with some of the best practices that the others mentioned, but can you give us more specific examples and actions items on how to deal with conflict, such as bringing the team together or facilitating open communication? And maybe you have an example you could give.
Wow, so that's like a whole class unto itself, right? Because I'm sure you've seen all kinds of different things. So it's easier, I will say, if it's an on-campus class and you can visually see the team, because you can oftentimes either feel or see the tension. And then you can bring it up with, the team or individuals, hey, how's everything going? And, oftentimes somebody will talk about it. And ask for your advice or coaching or something like that, and then you can help. There's one team that really stands out in my mind, and it was one where we did the Marshmallow Challenge, and I could see that there was this one person just absolutely dominating everything and not listening to other people and running over it was amazing to watch. And I thought, oh, this is going to be a really interesting debrief. Well, actually, their debrief took about 3 minutes, in which, as far as I could say, nothing was said about that. And so, they were starting to sort of go off for coffee or something, like in individuals or smaller groups. And I went over and I talked to them, and I, said, oh, did you guys talk about this, that, or the other? And, was there any conflict and things like that? And people said, no, everything was fine. And that team struggled mightily, and it was because of this person. So I ended up talking to many different team members, including the person that was very dominant, and it was not easy. I mean, that team, as I say, kind of limped across the finish line. And as you know from your own personal experience, some teams are easier to save than others, and some can't. But ultimately, if you can have them do a debrief, and if you can have them, evaluate each other, a lot of times some of those lessons will come out. One thing I found about teams is that, when you have teams in conflict, there are no two situations that are ever alike. A lot of times I think, oh, this is just like that one last semester, and you know what? It's not. I find I have to listen very carefully to what's being said, and how I might coach them to be able to manage that. But it's, that's a whole different class, I would say. But yeah, if you figure it out, please send it to me, because I will broadcast it widely. Or you should write a book and sell it. You'll make a lot of money.
Great. I'm just going to read some of the best practice to close it out. So we're running a few minutes late. But before I do, there was a lot of questions and interest around this team charter. And someone did ask if they've never used a team charter before, if that sample might be one of the examples that you share, have an example of a team charter that you could share with us.
Sure. I tell you what, my contact information is here. If you're interested in any of this stuff, just email me. It's margaret@mindandhand.com with hyphens, or mcandrews@fas.harvard.edu. And actually, I was going to ask you, if you have best practices or great resources, please send them my way, and I'd be very, very happy to be a focal, a collection point and get these out to people, because we're all learning things that work and don't work. And the more we share them, the better off we'll be, the better off our students will be, and we'll all be a little bit saner.
Wonderful. All right, so a couple of best practices that came up. This comes from Terry from Chicago. Incorporating a coach mentor, ideally a combination of academic and industry subject matter expert. Very clear project definition process with organization, utilizing a project charter process developed, specific milestones for student team client interaction, manage realistic client expectations, ensure the connection with the application of academic frameworks and conceptual models in the project without losing sight of project goals and objectives. This comes from Shelley from New Hampshire, giving teams class time to work together so I can consult with them and advise on group dynamics. This comes from, let's see, from Japan. At my business school, Nagoya University of Commerce and Business, for the Global MBA program, I set the groups for each class. Because we have over 30 nationalities among all the students each year, I break down groups into status, balance of regular and international exchange, gender, and nationalities. I focus on diversity in groups. I also hold a meeting with our regular students to set their expectations to be leaders in their groups. This is because they will earn a degree while exchange students stay for just a semester. This works when we have a little less than 100 students per year. Feedback from faculty has been great so far. Let's see, and let's do one last one. I can't get to all of them, but this comes from Carrie from Dartmouth. Every individual has his/her own approach to guiding student teams. As a director of a program working with a diverse group of faculty advisors, I'm always looking for simple ways to achieve a somewhat standard approach while encouraging individual styles approaches to flourish. If you could pick one book, article, resource to share with a group of faculty advisors charged with guiding student teams so that we can all be speaking a common language, what would you choose? And I think that's a good sort of closing one, Margaret, to mention your best practice resource guide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I can't tell whether it's actually in the handouts or whether you're going to send it out later, but also with that, I it's a relatively short list. It all fits in one page. It's a list of a couple of books that I found very helpful. One in particular that really deals with working with student teams, and one that is just about teams and team dynamics in general. And then I think I also put The Wisdom of Teams on there, which is actually one of my favorite books on teams, and it's actually relatively old. Excuse me. And then there's some articles, including a great New York Times article that was published just a few months ago about what Google has learned about building the perfect team. And I will leave you in suspense, so you'll go look at it. And also several blogs. So, but again, if you have some good ones, please send them my way and we'll update the list.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Our hour is up. As you close out, please do go ahead, fill out a few of those questions on the survey, and look up for our next webinar event as well. Thank you so much, Margaret. What a great hour.
Thank you. All right. Take care, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.